Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive historical anomaly. We're going to unpack exactly how an ancient state sitting right at the crossroads of East and West exploded outward into a highly influential empire. We are, of course, talking about the Greco Bactrian kingdom. For context, we're looking at a region that roughly covers modern-day Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. It's this incredibly fascinating story of a splinter state that didn't just survive, it absolutely thrived. And we are going to focus heavily today on exactly why they were able to expand the way they did. 2.5 million square kilometers. Just let that number sink in for a second. By 184 BC, this empire covered a staggering 2.5 million square kilometers. I mean, that is an absolutely massive footprint for a Hellenistic kingdom located entirely in Central Asia, totally cut off from the Mediterranean homeland of the Greeks. So, the crucial puzzle we're investigating today is this. How on earth did a rogue, breakaway satrapy pull this off? Why did the Greco Bactrian kingdom expand so rapidly and so aggressively to become one of the premier powers of the ancient world, eventually stretching all the way into the Indian subcontinent? Okay, let's map this out. First, we'll look at a kingdom born of rebellion. Then, the 1,000 golden cities. Third, their hybrid war machine. Fourth, we'll ask if they were protecting the Buddhist faith. And finally, 5, the legacy of an ancient empire. Section 1. A kingdom born of rebellion, a golden geopolitical opportunity. Because expansion always requires a spark, and the Greco-Bactrians found a perfect one. So, the Greek presence in this region actually predates Alexander the Great, but he really cemented it back in 327 BC when he settled tens of thousands of Greeks there. Fast forward a few generations to around 256 BC. You've got a local governor, a guy named Diodotus, who decides he is officially done taking orders from the massive Seleucid Empire. He seceded, and that bold move set the stage for an explosive outward expansion that by 180 BC would reach deep into India. Now, there's some really cool historical detective work regarding exactly why they pulled this off. Historians debate two timelines. You have the high chronology, which suggests Diodotus broke away early, around 255 BC. But then you have the low chronology, pointing to 246 BC. And this one tells a brilliant story of sheer opportunism. Around 246 BC, the ruling Seleucid Empire was getting absolutely hammered by a conflict known as the Third Syrian War. Diodotus saw his overlords completely distracted and bleeding resources, and he struck. This geopolitical power vacuum was the first major reason they could expand. There was literally no one out west strong enough to stop them from declaring independence and looking outward. Section 2. The 1,000 golden cities. Let's look at their economic engine, because a geopolitical opening isn't enough on its own. You don't fund a multi-million square kilometer empire on ambition alone. You need serious cash. The ancient Roman historian Justin actually hit the nail on the head here. He called it the extremely prosperous Bactrian Empire of the 1,000 cities. And honestly, he wasn't exaggerating. The Oxus Valley was incredibly fertile, generating immense agricultural wealth. If you want to know how a local rebellion pays for decades of massive military campaigns, well, there's your answer. They simply had the localized economy to sustain it. And we aren't talking about a bunch of rugged, dusty frontier outposts either. The archaeology from cities like Ai-Khanoum proves these were highly urbanized, deeply sophisticated metropolitan hubs. We're talking full Greek theaters, gymnasiums, gorgeous colonnaded courtyards. This level of sophisticated infrastructure gave them the stable administrative base they desperately needed to project power outward and manage immense territorial growth. Moving right along to Section 3, the hybrid war machine. Because wealth and cities only matter if you can defend them and expand them. So why was their army virtually unstoppable for a time? Because they adapted. They didn't stubbornly cling to traditional Greek tactics. They built an ancient combined arms force. They took their core Greek colonist infantry, fighting in those classic devastating pike phalanges, and perfectly integrated them with the insanely skilled light horsemen of native Indo-Iranian tribes, like the Bactrians and Sogdians. Throw in some hired Scythian mercenaries and javelin-wielding skirmishers, and you've got a flexible, lethal force that could outmaneuver pretty much anyone they ran into. And then, for pure stopping power, they unleashed the cataphracts. Think of a cataphract as the ancient world equivalent of a main battle tank. Heavily armored cavalry where both the rider and the horse are draped in scale armor. Their entire purpose was to deliver devastating shock charges that would completely shatter enemy infantry lines through sheer mass. They also heavily utilized this brilliant East meets West innovation. They started outfitting Indian war elephants with armored towers on their backs, known as howdahs. You'd pack these towers with men armed with bows and javelins, essentially turning the elephants into living, breathing, mobile fortresses. These units became so central to their military identity and their expansionist campaigns that they proudly stamped them right onto their currency. To really grasp the sheer scale of this military machine, get this. The ancient historian Polybius tells us that at the Battle of the Arius River in 208 BC, the Greco Bactrians fielded 10,000 horsemen, 10,000 in a single battle. That is an astounding number of cavalry for a Hellenistic army. When you can field numbers like that, it becomes very, very clear why their borders kept pushing outward. They literally outscaled their neighbors. Section 4. Protecting the Buddhist faith? Let's talk about ideology versus politics. So, we have the opportunity, the money, and the military. But what exactly motivated King Demetrius to push the empire's borders so deep into the Indian subcontinent around 8100 BC? Well, historians are totally split on this. On one side, you have Tarn's theory, which argues this was an ideological crusade. The Mauryan Empire had fallen to the Shunga dynasty, and some Buddhist scriptures claim the Shungas were actively persecuting Buddhists. Tarn suggests the Greco Bactrians, who are quite sympathetic to Buddhism, invaded to protect the faith. But on the flip side, historians like Thapar and Lamotte argue those accounts of persecution were highly exaggerated. They view it as pure realpolitik. The Greco Bactrians simply saw the Mauryan collapse as another prime geopolitical vacuum, essentially a massive land grab dressed up as a rescue mission. Regardless of who is right here, the end result was the massive eastward expansion and the creation of the Indo-Greek kingdom. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Legacy of an Ancient Empire, Syncretism and Survival. The physical expansion of the empire did eventually hit a wall, while nomadic groups, primarily the Yuezhi, swept down from the north into Bactria. They pushed the Greeks southward into the Kabul Valley, but here is the truly incredible parts. Even as the political structure of the Greco-Bactrian kingdom collapsed, their cultural footprint was so insanely strong that their conquerors just absorbed it. When the Yuezhi eventually established the mighty Kushan Empire, they adopted the Greek alphabet to write their own language, and they even integrated Greek deities right into their own religious pantheon. This prolonged contact forged an entirely new cultural identity. That massive expansion into India sparked the development of Greco-Buddhism. This was a profound cultural syncretism, where Greek artistic techniques were used to depict Indian religious themes. That's exactly why you can walk into a museum today and see ancient statues of the Buddha styled to look remarkably like the Greek god Apollo. It is a staggering blend of two completely different worlds. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder after today's explainer. Did this rogue, breakaway state ultimately change the ancient world more through the relentless expansion of its hybrid war machine, or through the incredible, long-lasting exchange of ideas and art that survived long after the empire itself actually fell? It's a fascinating question. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep questioning the past.